So I'm here to review 100 Meters, which is an anime movie that I just recently watched. I've decided to do this in my old digest style format. So it's a movie, 100 Meters. It came out in 2025. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's an hour and 46 minutes long, and I watched it on the 6th of April. And this is absolutely a 4 out of 5. That is like the solid, like that is exactly where it is placed. It is that place throughout the entire movie as I'm watching it. It is nowhere near a 3, but it is not quite good enough or quite appealing enough to me to get into the 5 out of 5 territory, but it is a 4 out of 5. This is a very fun movie. I enjoyed watching this movie quite a lot. There's two things that I think are interesting about this. One is the premise, which is that it's all about a 100-meter race. From the very, well, not from the very first shot. The first shots in this movie are very like abstract and kind of like about the history of running and all that. But the first actual shot of our characters, the present day and all that, well, not the present day, but like in the movie, is them running the race that happens right at the end of this movie. And all of it is like kind of leading up to that moment, right? Like it's set up that way so that you're like invested in that final race that's going to happen eventually. And what is like the path that gets there. So the premise itself is like really cool. It's like race after race after race after race, and then the final one is like the important one. I mean, it feels very similar to kind of Challenges in a way in its premise, where it's like Challenges is a movie about tennis kind of, where the whole movie is framed around a single tennis match that happens right at the end basically, and the movie is like following the characters as you're kind of getting to that eventual endpoint. This is a very different movie to that, with a very different, like a much larger cast of characters, with much more philosophy behind what's actually being said and all that. But the premise is very similar, where you are basically centering around a 100-meter race. And I like it. It's really cool. It is also, in case somehow you have never heard about this, this is apparently this, as well as Orb on the Movements of the Earth, are both originally manga, and they're both created by the same person, the same mangaka, as they say. And it is very clear. And we're going to talk about comparisons later. But basically what that means is that the same kind of, I don't know if anyone here has seen Orb, but I certainly have very recently, but the same kind of philosophical dialogue that is present in Orb is also present in this. So there's a lot of like philosophy behind like, what does it mean to run 100 meters? And what does it mean to be a human who exists on Earth? And like all that kind of stuff is in this movie. And it's interesting. I mean, altogether, it makes like a very interesting kind of premise with a very unique kind of, I don't know, spin to it with the philosophical stuff. So I like that. The other element, which is probably the majority of like what made me want to watch this movie initially, is the very interesting presentation. So firstly, this movie has a very specific directing style to it. I could not possibly know how to describe what this style is, but like the perfect example of this is if you've seen the movie, it is the final race where there's like so many cuts to like all these different characters. Because obviously, for context, the movie spends a lot of time talking about how like 100 meters is something that people dedicate their lives to. But in the end, it's a 10-second race and that's it, like 10 seconds and it's done. So the movie kind of, whenever it has these races that are incredibly short, it doesn't go down the approach of making it actually 10 seconds or anything like that. But what it does is that it really portrays the intensity of those 10 seconds by having like incredibly rapid cuts between characters and different like perspectives of the same character. Like sometimes you'll be directly focused on their face. Sometimes you'll be like cutting directly, only seeing their feet. Sometimes you get like a shot from behind and see all the people in the race, and you get a shot above and from the crowd, and you're like cutting between different characters so quickly. And it's just, it's an interesting style. I think it's really cool. Like directing wise, this is a very interestingly directed movie. There's also a lot of shots where like when we follow a lot of characters who tend to be at the front of the race throughout this movie. And whenever we're doing that, the movie does this certain thing sometimes, which is that it only focuses on them, like from a side view when they're in the race, the 100-meter race. And it's like, it's interesting because it's like very like anxiety inducing, because you see them and you're only seeing them and you know they're coming first at the moment, but because of how close you are, you don't see how close the people behind them are. So they could be like really far behind them, but they could also literally be inches away from them. And it's like a little anxiety inducing thing. And also it's like a similar perspective of the person who's actually running, because they truly don't know how far the people behind them are. So I don't know, little shots like this where I'm like, this is a cool idea and it is really well done. It like gets me invested in the movie. So I like all that. There's also a bunch of like POV shots where you're like looking at the perspective of the person who's running and seeing what's in front of them. It's really cool. Like it'll be blurred a lot of the time because of how intense they're running and how tired they're getting. And sometimes you'll see like the image here, you'll see like the perspective of someone who is behind and seeing the people in front of them and like getting their internal monologue as they're like seeing the people who are like so far ahead of them. And it's cool. I like the style of this movie in terms of like directing. The other element of this movie is, I haven't looked into it at all. I saw like some clip on TikTok or whatever that was showing behind the scenes a little bit, but it is very clearly a lot of rotoscoping in this movie, where the idea is that you have like live action reference footage, like for instance, people running a race or people sitting in a crowd or something like that. And you kind of use that as a reference, like a very literal reference, like potentially sketching over it particularly like closely. And what you get is like, in effect, you see animation that is incredibly detailed or incredibly like realistic feeling or very grounded. And it's like, you can kind of see the camera behind the animation, which is interesting. This movie has a lot of this. I wouldn't be surprised if like every major sequence in this movie was rotoscoped. I have no idea if it is or not, but yeah. Now this creates a very interesting feeling for the movie where it just feels incredibly grounded and realistic. And there's throughout this movie, there's one sequence which is like a 4-minute or 5-minute, like I timed it, it was like roughly between 4 and 5 minutes, depending on where you start it. But it's a sequence which is entirely like very clearly rotoscoped and feels almost like a filter is being applied to real life, where you're doing a continuous like shot where you're starting at the people on the starting line of the race. You go all the way around, you go to the audience, you like show the audience, you turn around, you see them doing their like warm-up run, and then you go and you follow, the camera continues and does the thing that you see in like the Olympics 100-meter race, where you have each of the characters being introduced and they're doing their like wave to the camera or whatever as they say their name. Then you go to the next one and it's in a continuous shot of just like rotoscoped animation. Is pretty crazy. And it's super cool. It makes it feel unique. I don't know if it's like, I can't really explain why I like it so much, but it just makes it feel like a very unique experience. And yeah. Now the other movie this kind of reminds me of a little bit, mostly in terms of the non-rotoscope sequences, but when you're seeing like the actual, like, say the characters more close up and it's not the motion that's important or anything like that, is that it reminds me of Look Back a little bit, like the way that was animated. I don't know how quite to explain it, but like the characters look a little similar, like in terms of the way they're drawn and colors and all that, but the actual animation feels very similar to that too. So I don't know what to say there, but it was just the thing I thought about. But yeah. Now in terms of rotoscoping, there's like two particular shots. There's obviously the one I talked about there, the 4-minute, like really long, extreme like rotoscoping shot. There's also the moment where Togashi, who's our main character, when he's breaking down in front of the kids, and it's like extremely like realistic crying animation. It's super cool. I like it. The movie feels very experimental. It's probably the best word to put it. So yeah. Now, it is also interesting because I went into this knowing about the rotoscoped animation, right? It's like I saw the trailer like a while ago and I noticed it there, and it's very clear that like this was going to be a rotoscoping movie. It isn't all pervasive though. Like it isn't throughout the entire movie. There are certainly moments where you're like, well, long stretches of time where you don't even think about it. Like it doesn't even cross your mind. But then come scenes like that 4-minute scene or the crying scene or whatever, where it's really the focus and you notice it. So it's not necessarily exactly like, oh, this is a completely rotoscoped movie or anything like that. There are very clear moments of like, you would not be able to tell that it is rotoscoped in certain moments because it probably isn't rotoscoped in those moments. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm making a point there, but yeah, it is what it is. So yeah, rotoscoping. The other element of the production, which really stands out to me as well, is the sound design. Now, I don't really, like, I'm not an expert of sound design. I would say I barely know anything about sound design, to be honest. But the running like noises, the feet like hitting the ground, and especially the breathing of all the different characters, their intense breathing, like when they're running and all that. This is fantastic. Like it is some of the best stuff. Like it is, I would dare say it might be better than the animation, but I know that's a bit fallacious there, but there are moments where it's like, you're literally just seeing the eyes of a character and you're hearing the hard breathing and their like shoes hitting the ground or whatever as they're running. It's like, this is the coolest moment ever. So the sound design is awesome in this movie. So yeah, I don't know how to talk about it, but it's cool. It feels very realistic, very like first person perspective almost, where it's like when I've run in the past, when I say I've run in the past, I mean back in high school when I did the 100-meter race for the last time, it is like a feeling you get, like you hear your own like breathing, and it's like the movie conveys that really well. So I appreciate that. That was really awesome. So sound design is really good. And then the music is interesting. The music for the majority of this movie, to me, didn't really stand out. Where I was like, okay, it's there. I don't really notice it that much. Like every now and then I'll be like, oh yeah, music's playing right now. But for the most part, I don't really notice it. But when there's important moments or big moments or climactic moments, the music is a key part of what makes those moments so good. That 4-minute sequence that I'm going to continually keep mentioning. Yes, the rotoscoping is cool and it looks really interesting, but the music that's playing during that scene is also awesome. And that the score is very dynamic as well, where it's like, you have, especially moments concerning Togashi, which is the main character, there'll be moments where it's like the music is kind of quiet and like it's going, like the same song is playing when you're seeing a bunch of other characters, but then the camera like focuses on Togashi, like for instance, when he's running or like when he locks in or something like that, and the music gets super intense and it's like, this is cool. So I like the dynamic nature of the soundtrack as well. It's really cool. But yeah, the music, great. But yeah, presentation-wise, like production-wise, this is a very interesting movie. It is probably the primary appeal, just the production. It is really cool to see it. So yeah, that's one of my overall thoughts. Cool premise, cool execution. Now, I have a few things I want to mention in terms of standout scenes. They are mainly just the running scenes, like the big races, the big ones, There are a lot of races in this, but there's a lot of like heats and stuff, which are less important, and I don't really care about those too much. But the first relay race is a highlight. This was the first moment in the movie where I was like, oh, I'm in. I couldn't believe how invested I was, like, when this relay race happened. But basically the idea is that you've got for the majority of this movie, they are running a 100-meter race where it's just like, one and done, 10 seconds, they run by themselves. But the first real challenge in the movie is that they want to kind of get members for a club, or they want to basically have their club exist at their high school, but they can't do that without enough members. So in order to like prove to the faculty that it's like worth having this club around, they enter a competition, and in the competition they have to do well in the 200 or in the 800-meter race. Otherwise, they're going to lose their club. And the race itself has like 4 people. And it's 4 people we've set up like a little bit, like pretty well. There's obviously Togashi is one of them. There's another fast runner guy who used to be like the most promising like high school runner or something like that. His name is, I wrote it down somewhere. Where is it? Nigami. He's in the race. And then you've got 2 girls. I don't remember their name because they become less relevant as the movie goes on. But it is a super cool race where each character has their moment where you have the first girl running and she's doing super good. And it's like, whoa, she's kind of surprising me at how fast she's running. And it was really cool. And then you're waiting for the handover because they were practicing the handover of the baton or whatever it's called. And they nail it. And it's like, oh, they nailed it. This is cool. The passing went well. And the second girl's running and she's like going a bit slower. And you're like, oh no, this poor girl. But then at the end, when she's like going to hand it over, she apologizes and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, whatever. And he's like, don't worry, I'll make it up or whatever. And then Togashi runs. And when he runs, the music, like the camera angle and the music locks in and he's like overtaking everyone. It's like super awesome. And then Nigami takes over, and in that interaction when he's taking over, you have him and his rival who are about to be like, they're standing next to each other and they're gonna like run, and they have like a brief exchange before they take over, which is that his rival is like, oh, it's okay, we can finally have a fair race or something, and then Nigami's like, the person I'm racing against isn't you, because I think the implication is that he's racing for himself, like he's trying to prove that he can still run. And it's cool. It's a cool moment. So yeah, the first relay race was awesome. The next one is the scene I've talked about a bunch, which is that 4-minute, extremely realistic, like rotoscope sequence, which is the final high school national race. But I guess I've talked about the lead up enough of it. But one other thing that's really cool in this race is that after the race is done, Togashi loses this race. He comes second. He loses to Komiya, I think. Was that his name? Komiya? Yeah, Komiya. And it's like, we focus on him as he's like standing in the rain, and the rain is getting way more intense, and the music, the rain sound effect is like getting louder and louder and louder, and it drowns everything out. It turns, basically, there's so much rain that everything basically turns white, and it cuts, and it's like 10 years later. And it's like from the loud rain to the silent, like nothing when you see the 10-year later time skip, and it's like, man. So basically this whole race was super cool. Oh, then you have the picture I have here on my screen, which is potentially my favorite moment. It's the Heat race that Kaido has. And when I say Kaido, I haven't mentioned this guy at all, but firstly, he's voiced by the great, I don't know his name. I think it's like Tsuda or something. He's a really good voice actor. He voices like so many characters, like Orsted, and in Orb, for instance, he voiced Noak, and I'm sure you've heard of him, okay? But he's an older guy. When I say older, I mean, we don't exactly know his age, but I would assume he's like in his late 30s or something like that, which is obviously very old compared to all these younger people who are the front runners now. But he used to be really good. I don't actually remember the details of if he was like the best or something like that in Japan, but basically he used to be really good and really famous, and everyone was like cheering for him, and like he was the front runner and everything. But now in these days, like everyone else is kind of overtaking him, at least in the public perception. And people don't really think much about him anymore. So when it comes to his heat in this final kind of competition, there's this cool sequence where it's like a bunch of interviews of people, and it's like, oh, who do you think is going to win this race? And they're all saying it's going to be these 2 people. It's going to be Komiya, or was it Zaitsu? Basically, it was like there were 2 people that they're saying it's going to win the race. Kaido wasn't even mentioned. Then you get his like perspective, and it's like, oh, I guess I'm not even relevant anymore. And it's like, yeah, true. But then you actually see the race itself with these 3 people, and it's super cool because you see his perspective of the race, like from his first person view, which is this image here, where he is falling behind. And he says, I wrote it down. He says, I see. So this is my reality. And it's like, man, this is interesting to see like the perspective of, like, throughout this entire movie up until this point, we have basically followed the perspective of the people coming first, the people winning the races, where there is no one in front of them. When we see their perspective, they just see the blurry track ahead of them. But for the first time, when we see Kaido's perspective of this race, where he's like no longer in his prime and there are new people who are front runners now, he sees like, you see people in front of him, and it's like super cool and interesting, and you realize that, this man is like, he's past his prime, and it's sad, but like, it is what it is. And then he locks in and he says, well then, if that's the case, it's time to escape from reality. And he overtakes them and he wins the race. And it's like, it's the coolest moment ever. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't know what to say beyond, I was not expecting that. I wasn't expecting him to get his final, like, this will be my final race and I'll prove that I can actually win. And he does, and it's like super awesome. So yeah, it's super cool. And then the final kind of awesome moment in this particular scene is that there's a story thread throughout this entire movie where Komiya, he's got his own perspective when it comes to running, which is that he basically, I don't know if I could properly explain it because I don't know if I really paid attention to this aspect of the movie, but I think the idea is that he doesn't really care about the competition. He doesn't find joy in racing or whatever. He's dedicated his life to it. He wants to win. Like it's that kind of mentality. And at the same time, that's Komiya. You've got a character called Zaitsu, who is kind of a wiser, or maybe not wiser, but a more philosophical character. And his perspective is that, he says it at some point in the movie, where his perspective is basically like, there is no joy in like winning or anything like that. The actual joy is in racing with other people, like enjoying that 100-meter moment, like 10 seconds for as much as you can, or putting everything into it and getting everything out of it. And at the end of this race, where Kaido overtakes both Komiya and Zaitsu, you have a brief moment right at the end when Komiya notices that Kaido's about to beat him, where Komiya's eyes like widen and he like kind of freaks out for a moment. He's like, oh my god, I'm gonna come second, like I'm not gonna win. And then you cut to Zaitsu, and Zaitsu smiles. And you know in that moment that it's like, Zaitsu's happy because Komiya in this moment is kind of feeling the rush of like racing against someone else. He's not thinking about like, oh, I'm going to win and I'm going to get that feeling of winning. He's worried about the person he's running against, which is Kaido in this moment. And Zaitsu's happy about it. So I thought that was super awesome. But this scene is just, it's really cool. And then the final standout scene is obviously the final actual race. We've got the rapid cutting between all the, like we've got three main characters that we're following, which is the main character Togashi, or Togashi, I guess. You've got Komiya, and you've got Kaido. You got the three people who you're following throughout a lot of this movie. And they're all in one race at the end. It is the final race. And you're cutting between all of them in this like 10-second kind of final race they're doing. You get shots of the crowd, you get shots of their feet, you get a symbolic flashback of them running as kids, which is how the movie opens as well. So it's like a super cool, like full circle thing. And then as they're both like getting right until the end of the race, a smile, shows up on both their faces, and they're both happy because they got enjoyment out of running against each other again. And the movie ends. It's like super cool. So I like the final race as well. Now, the main thing I want to talk about, like now, the only real thing I have left to talk about is comparisons to Orb, in that, firstly, the character designs are very similar. You can definitely tell immediately that it's like, okay, this feels like it's made by the same person who made Orb. Obviously, the manga, I mean, not the actual animes, but that's the first thing. But the other thing is something I really haven't talked about too much at this point, which is the character exposition with a philosophical kind of basis. Where there's basically a lot of characters in this, and whenever they talk, they generally, whenever they talk about the 100 meters, they talk about the 100 meters from a philosophical perspective. This is something that if you've seen Orb on the Movements of the Earth, this is something that Orb does all the time. Basically, every bit of dialogue in that show is about what it means, what the truth is, and the importance of knowledge, and like where is the place of the world in terms of like, I don't know, in terms of truth versus belief. Basically, there's a whole philosophical thing in every character in that show. Just everything they say is basically framed through that. This is very similar kind of where you have like, a lot of people saying stuff about the 100 meters and racing and what it means to like dedicate your life to something and all of this. I didn't particularly find this too interesting in this movie. In Orb, it's fascinating. In this, I think it's like, maybe because I don't really... Orb is focused more on truth, and to me, truth is more interesting of a theme or like a philosophical idea. This one, it's more about like dedicating your life or like having short moments of your life define the rest of your life, and this is like somewhat interesting, but it appeals to me less, so I don't really have too much to say about it. But there were two bits in particular from Zaitsu, who is the most philosophical guy in this kind of movie, who has I guess the most rigidly philosophical guy. Everyone is kind of philosophical in this, but he is much more rigidly philosophical. He has two moments. One of them is that he gives a speech to Komiya in this movie, where it's just the two of them, and Komiya, like I said, is the person who is more like dead set on winning, and he doesn't really think much, like he has his own way of doing things, and he's basically the most dedicated and training the hardest and blah, 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 whatever. I'm probably doing a bad job of conveying Komiya if you're a fan of the movie, but I think you get the point, hopefully. But Zaitsu basically tells him what I said before, which is that being far ahead of everyone is basically the same as being far behind everyone. You get the same feeling where it's like there's a distance between you and everyone else. The real meaning in the race is actually the joy you get or the feeling you get of running against someone else. Like a lonesome race where you're far ahead or far behind, you don't really get much from it. It's not the medals, it's not the records you set. What's really the appeal of this 100-meter race is like, well, who you are racing against and what you feel in those moments of competition, which I thought was interesting. His speech to Komiya was interesting. The other thing is Zaitsu's retirement speech, which was super cool. I have the whole quote here, actually. It says, "The 100 meters condenses a whole life into a single moment. Just a couple of centimeters that can be the thing that destroys you. However, that's the reason why we feel euphoria. A wealth of things can be found merely in that distance." I think this is cool. It is the kind of thesis of the movie, which is that 100 meters is only 10 seconds long, but an entire life goes into it, and the feelings you get in those 10 seconds are all-encompassing. You've got anxiety, you've got excitement, you've got joy, you've got jealousy, you've got hatred, it's just an amalgamation of emotions that all get fed into as 10 seconds, and it's just fun. People dedicate their lives to it. It's awesome. So yeah. Now, yeah, that's the bulk of everything I want to say about this movie, but there's a few other things. One is that I was a little confused at certain points watching this, mainly because it's a movie that spans a lot of time. So there's a lot of characters which have the same character when they're younger, and then they get older, and then they get even older, like with a 10-year time skip. And they have different voice actors at different points, and they look different, like character-wise, character design-wise at different points. And it's a little, for me, it was a little hard to keep track. Not the fault of the movie, more my fault, but I just wanted to say that, you know, if there's anything I'm missing or like mischaracterizing here, it is probably because of this. So yeah. And then the other two things that I say that the movie has an element of addressing or bringing up the idea of addiction to a race or to racing in general, but not in a negative way. It does it in an interesting way, which is that at 2 points in the movie, two of our characters, Togashi, our main character, and Ami, who is the kind of his initial senior guy who was like the best in high school or whatever. He was in the relay race, if you remember what I was talking about before. Both of these people are both retire or they kind of like informally retire from racing, but they don't necessarily officially drop out or anything like that. And for both of them, all it takes is for them to do one race, like one informal kind of race. It doesn't have to be like a fully like proper one, for them to get addicted to it again and to get back into it. Like they can have 6 months off of just not doing anything at all, and then all it takes is one race and they're back in mentally. They just want to do it. It's an addiction, you know, but not in a negative way, in like a this is my life kind of way. So that was really interesting. And then the final thing the movie kind of touches on, which is a really obvious thing, I guess, in if you're, you know, thinking about 100-meter races, but the movie talks about the changing of the status quo at certain points, where basically, if you dedicate your life to this 10-second race, you can be at the top of your game for years, and then someone just comes out of nowhere, and now you're completely irrelevant now. There is like, you were the best for years and years and years, and without any fault of your own, just someone random like comes into existence, and no one cares about you anymore. It's interesting. I like it. But that's all I got to say about 100 meters. It was a bit rambly, you know. I don't know if I made the most sense here when I was talking about this, but I recommend this. I think me talking about what happens, like, now that you've been spoiled or whatever, I don't think this ruins the movie at all. Because if you haven't seen it, a big part of what makes it so good is the execution of like the things that I'm saying. You can't really, talking about this movie does not give you the same experience as watching it. The plot isn't too relevant here. The themes even aren't too relevant here. It is all, to me, the execution. So go watch this. I don't know if for some reason you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, but yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe right now and see you next time.